There's a stretch of pavement in the Mojave Desert where the wind is the only thing still moving. A neon sign creaks on rusted hinges above an empty motel court. The pumps out front haven't dispensed a gallon of gas since the Ford administration. And if you stand there long enough, in the heat shimmer and the silence, you can almost hear it, the sound of 1,000 engines that used to roar past this exact spot, back when this was the only road west. This was Route 66. The Mother Road. 2 lanes of cracked asphalt that once carried the entire dream of America, Dust Bowl families fleeing Oklahoma, honeymooners in Finn Cadillacs, truckers, drifters, salesmen, and kids pressed against the window watching the country roll by. For over 50 years, if you wanted to get from Chicago to Los Angeles, you drove through the heart of small-town America, one flickering diner sign at a time. And then, almost overnight, it was over. Starting in the 1950s and finishing by the mid-1980s, the interstate highway system carved wide, fast, 4-lane bypasses around the towns Route 66 used to feed. Interstate 40 alone erased dozens of communities from the map of American travel, not by destroying them, but by simply routing around them. No dramatic ending. No headline. Just a slow fade, one closed gas station at a time, until entire towns were left stranded a few miles from a highway that no longer needed them. Today, we're driving that old road. All 8 states of it. Not the interstate, the original road, the one that still exists in fragments, frontage roads, and forgotten town squares. We're going to see what happens to a place when the world moves on without it. So find a comfortable seat, because this is a long haul, just the way the Mother Road always was. Let's start where it all begins, out west in California. California, where the road meets the desert, just north of San Bernardino, up through Cajon Pass, the land turns to sand and scrub and strange rock formations that look like something out of a Western film set. This is Mormon Rocks, and if you turn off onto the dirt tracks that wind through the canyon, you'll eventually come across something that doesn't belong, an old rail car, rusted and half swallowed by the desert. Nobody's entirely sure how it got there. The working theory is a derailment, decades ago, that nobody ever bothered to clean up. The desert simply adopted it. It's the kind of find that tells you everything about this stretch of California. Things don't get removed out here, they just get left, and the land keeps them. Keep heading east and you'll pass through Daggett and Ludlow, 2 railroad towns that were thriving little waypoints once, back when trains and then automobiles both needed a place to stop, refuel, and rest. Daggett still has a scattering of residents, but its old mercantile buildings and service stations sit boarded and sun-bleached, the paint blistered off in sheets. Ludlow is even quieter, a handful of structures baking in the heat, a general store that somehow still opens, and the bones of a town that used to matter to everyone driving through. But if there's one place in California that captures the whole spirit of Route 66's afterlife, it's Amboy. This is the home of Roy's Motel and Cafe, and if you've ever seen a photograph representing Route 66 nostalgia, there's a good chance it was Roy's. That towering, arrow-shaped neon sign against an empty desert sky has become the unofficial symbol of the entire highway. The cafe still operates in a limited way, kept alive more as a monument than a business. But wander past it and you'll find an abandoned schoolhouse and a small church, quietly decaying, reminders that Amboy was once an actual town with actual families, not just a photo opportunity for road trippers. A little further out is Goff's, which isn't really a ghost town so much as a town that turned itself into a museum of itself. The old schoolhouse there now anchors an open-air collection of mining equipment, military relics from a nearby training site, and preserved historic structures, a strange and wonderful little pocket of preservation in the middle of nowhere, run by people who refuse to let this stretch of desert forget what it used to be. From here, the road climbs out of California and crosses into Arizona, and the ghost towns start getting even stranger. Arizona, burros, death caves, and dinosaurs. Arizona might have the richest collection of Route 66 relics anywhere on the whole route, and it starts with a town that refuses to die quietly, Oatman. This was a gold rush boomtown, and when the mines dried up, most places like it simply vanished. Oatman didn't. Instead, it reinvented itself as a Wild West tourist stop, complete with staged gunfight reenactments in the street and, this is not a joke, wild burros, descendants of pack animals turned loose by the old miners, who now wander freely down the main street, poking their heads into shops and stopping traffic like they own the place. It's one part ghost town, one part living theater, and it's unlike anything else on the entire route. Further along, you'll find Cool Springs and Hackberry, 2 spots that have become unofficial open-air museums of the Route 66 experience. Cool Springs is a lovingly restored 1920s gas station, rebuilt after it was literally blown up for a movie scene decades ago, brought back from nothing because people cared enough to do it. Hackberry has a similar restored station, surrounded by vintage cars parked at odd angles and old signage stacked up like a scrapyard of American road culture. Neither one sells much gas anymore. What they sell is memory. Then there's Seligman, often called the town that saved Route 66. Back in the 1980s, when the interstate finally bypassed this stretch and the road was officially decommissioned, a local barber named Angel Delgadillo refused to accept that his town's main street should just disappear. He organized, he lobbied, and eventually Route 66 was designated a historic highway because of efforts that started right here. Today Seligman is one of the best preserved stretches on the entire road. Retro diners, vintage gift shops, and a color palette that looks like it was lifted straight out of 1962. Not every stop in Arizona is quite so cheerful, though. Two Guns is one of the eeriest places on the entire route, the crumbling remains of a 1920s roadside zoo, complete with old stone animal enclosures now standing empty and cracked. Nearby is the site known as Apache Death Cave, tied to a dark chapter of regional history involving a massacre generations before the highway ever existed. Two Guns tried reinventing itself more than once, as a trading post, as a KOA campground, and failed each time. What's left now is stone ruins, graffiti, and a silence that feels different from the peaceful quiet of Seligman or Hackberry. This one feels heavier. And then, out near the edge of the Painted Desert, there's Meteor City and Fort Courage, abandoned trading posts that once caught tourists heading to see the famous meteor crater nearby. Fort Courage is the strangest of the bunch, built in the 1960s as a themed attraction modeled after the fictional army outpost from the television show F Troop. It's a monument to a very specific, very passing moment in American pop culture, and now it just sits there, fading in the sun, a punchline nobody's around to laugh at anymore. From Arizona, the road drops into New Mexico, and the ghost towns start getting closer to the interstate, sometimes uncomfortably close. New Mexico, living in the shadow of the interstate. In New Mexico, you start to see something different, towns that aren't miles off in the desert, forgotten and remote, but ghost towns sitting practically underneath the interstate that killed them. San Fidel and Budville are two of these. Budville has a particularly dark footnote in its history. The old Budville trading post was the site of an unsolved 1967 murder, the kind of small-town mystery that never made national news but never quite left local memory either. The trading post building still stands, caving in slowly, its story mostly known only to the people who still live nearby. Cuervo and Newkirk are even more unsettling. These are proper ghost towns, homes with their roofs collapsing inward, churches with broken windows and pews still inside, gas stations with the pumps still standing like tombstones, and all of it sits just off the shoulder of Interstate 40, visible to thousands of drivers a day who have no idea what they're looking at. There's something almost eerie about that proximity. These aren't remote ruins you have to seek out. They're right there, at highway speed, decaying in plain sight while the modern world rushes past 40 feet away. Then you reach Tucumcari, which was once one of the largest and busiest stops on the entire highway. There's an old saying, Tucumcari tonight, that used to appear on billboards for 100 miles in either direction, promising travelers a bed for the night in a town packed with motor courts and diners. Drive through today and you'll find massive abandoned motel complexes, including the old Paradise Cafe and Motel, their signs still hanging on, some still lit, most just rusting monuments to a boom that ended almost as fast as it began. The downtown still has a real architectural character to it, old brick storefronts, faded murals, the bones of a town that used to be a genuine destination rather than a place people just pass through. Next, the road crosses into Texas, and things get strange in a very different way. Texas, dry counties and buried Cadillacs. Right on the New Mexico-Texas border sits Glen Rio, a ghost town with maybe the most fascinating backstory on the whole route. Glen Rio existed because of a legal quirk. The New Mexico side of town was in a county where alcohol was legal, so that's where the bars were. The Texas side was in a dry county, but had lower fuel taxes, so that's where the gas stations went. Two halves of one tiny town, each serving a completely different purpose, split by an invisible state line. You can still find the ruin of what was advertised as the first and last motel in Texas, depending on which direction you were driving, a sign that captures exactly what these little border towns were built to do, catch travelers coming and going, in both directions, for whatever they needed. A bit further along are Adrian and Vega. Adrian holds a small but symbolic distinction. It's the official midpoint of Route 66, sitting exactly 1,139 miles from both Chicago and Los Angeles. There's a certain poetry to a ghost town adjacent stretch of highway being the exact geographic center of the whole American road trip experience. And then, just outside Amarillo, you hit one of the strangest and most photographed spots on the entire route, Cadillac Ranch. 10 Cadillacs, buried nose first in the dirt at the same angle as the Great Pyramid of Giza, planted there by an eccentric art collective back in 1974. It's not abandoned in the traditional sense, quite the opposite, it's constantly visited, but it might be the single best symbol of everything this journey is about. A monument to American car culture, half buried and left to be slowly transformed by decades of visitors and spray paint, changing a little more with every single person who stops. Further east is Shamrock, home to one of the true architectural treasures of the whole highway, the Conoco Tower Station and the You Drop In Cafe, a stunning piece of Art Deco design with sweeping green and cream lines that looks like it belongs in a 1930s film rather than the Texas Panhandle. Unlike so much of what we've seen, this one has been lovingly restored, standing today as proof that some of these places found a way to survive, when enough people decided they were worth saving. From the Texas Panhandle, the road rolls into Oklahoma, the state where Route 66 itself was practically invented. Oklahoma, the birthplace of the Mother Road. Oklahoma has a special claim to this highway. It was an Oklahoman, Cyrus Avery, who championed the creation of Route 66 back in the 1920s, and this state has some of the most personality-packed remnants of the whole route. Right on the Texas border sits Texola, a tiny ghost town that time seems to have simply skipped over. Its most remarkable surviving structure is a preserved single-room jailhouse, built all the way back in 1898, still standing open for visitors to walk through, a tiny stone box that once held the town's troublemakers, now standing empty in a town with almost nobody left to trouble. Further along is Arcadia, home to the Round Red Barn, an honest-to-goodness architectural oddity built in the late 1800s, one of the only round barns ever constructed in the state. Nearby stands the abandoned Rock of Ages Conoco Station, its pumps frozen in time, a quiet companion piece to the barn's strange geometry. And then there's Afton and Commerce, two towns whose main streets feel like they were sealed in a time capsule sometime around 1975 and never opened again. Old hand-painted signs advertising VHS rentals still cling to storefronts. Vintage grocery store facades sit with their windows soaped over. And scattered here and there are filling stations with distinctive conical roofs, a regional architectural style unique to this stretch of Oklahoma, built to catch the eye of drivers at 45 miles an hour and now just catching the eye of the occasional curious traveler willing to slow down and look. From Oklahoma, the road crosses into Kansas for one of its shortest but most meaningful stretches, before rolling on through Missouri and into Illinois for the final leg of the journey. Kansas, Missouri, and Illinois, the long road home. Route 66 only clips the very southeastern corner of Kansas, but it packs a lot of history into those few miles. In Galena, you'll find a beautifully restored 1930s service station, small and unassuming, but with an outsized legacy. This exact station, and the tow truck that once operated out of it, became the visual inspiration for characters in the animated film Cars. It's a strange kind of immortality, a sleepy Kansas gas station living on in the imagination of millions of kids who've never heard of Route 66 at all. Missouri brings us Red Oak too, and this one's a little different from everything else we've seen. This isn't a ghost town that was abandoned and left to rot, it's a ghost town that was deliberately rebuilt. An artist named Lowell Davis, heartbroken over the disappearance of his own childhood hometown, spent years relocating historic buildings from the region, a general store, a blacksmith shop, a church, piece by piece, into one open-air park designed to feel exactly like the small towns that Route 66 used to connect. It's not really abandoned at all. It's a memorial, built with lumber and nails instead of stone, to every town on this list that didn't get the same second chance. And then Illinois, the final stretch, where the road that started in the desert ends up somewhere much greener and much more historic. In Lincoln and Odell, you'll find beautifully preserved 1920s standard oil filling stations, simple wood frame buildings that have been restored almost exactly to their original condition. Nearby stands something a little more unsettling, an abandoned 1941 Illinois State Police Headquarters building, its dark brick facade and empty windows giving it the look of a place with more stories than anyone's ever bothered to write down. And finally, the road brings us to its true last stop, not a diner, not a motel, but the Joliet Prison. This massive stone facility operated continuously from 1858 all the way to 2002, making it one of the longest-running prisons in American history, and its imposing walls have made it a filming location for movies and television for decades. Today it's open for public tours, a fittingly weighty final chapter for a highway that carried so much of the country's hope, ambition, and eventual disappointment along its two narrow lanes. The end of the road, 8 states. Thousands of miles. And underneath almost every single stop on this list, the same quiet story repeating itself over and over, a town built entirely around the assumption that people would always need to pass through it, and a highway system that decided, all at once, that they didn't. It's easy to look at Route 66 through rose-colored glasses, all neon signs and milkshakes and open road nostalgia. But the real story sitting underneath all that romance is a harder one. It's the story of what happens to a place, and to the people who called it home, when the road that gave them a reason to exist simply picks up and moves somewhere else. Some towns, like Seligman, fought back and found a way to survive on nostalgia itself. Others, like Cuervo and Glen Rio, just faded, one empty storefront at a time, until there was nobody left to turn the lights off. Next time you're cruising down a modern interstate at 75 miles an hour, take a second to think about what's sitting just off the shoulder. Somewhere out there, in the heat shimmer past the guardrail, there's probably an old motel sign still standing, still waiting for headlights that stopped coming decades ago. That's the mother road for you. Not gone. Just waiting.